There's nothing quite as terrifying as making a mistake in our modern day culture. I know that for me, coming onto YouTube, one of my biggest fears is actually offending people. And it's not because I worry about hurting people's feelings so much, although that is a thing, but it's more because I know that if I make a mistake, I could be raked over the coals and my entire efforts to create a YouTube channel could be destroyed because of that mistake. So, fear of failure is something that I totally understand, and it's something that I have to work through on a regular basis. So, it's something that I know you probably struggle with as well. But before we get into how to deal with failure and how to work through it and create a better life for yourself, we first need to talk about what we mean by failure in the first place. Because people refer to a whole bunch of different things when they're talking about failure in general, and we kind of have to all get on the same page. So there's this notion, I believe it stems back to the creation of the light bulb, where Edison was talking about how he didn't fail to create the light bulb. He just found 1,000 different ways that it didn't work. And while you can call that failure if you want to, you could also choose not to call it failure. And I think a lot of people, when they refer to failure, they're talking about this ultimate, like, I give up, I'm never going to try again, I have failed, and that's it. But when I'm referring to failure, I'm going for a much lighter version, and yet something that is really, really challenging to work through, which is basically just making a mistake. And I'd say that most people who have a fear of failure are actually talking more about this concept of, I fear making a mistake. Now, the reason that you fear making a mistake probably stems back to your school education, where you made some kind of mistake. You gave the wrong answer and people laughed at you. Or possibly you were at home and you did something wrong and you got in trouble. And then every time you did something right, you got praised. And we always like praise. Praise is a delightful thing. So we're naturally predisposed to deciding to do things that bring us praise and avoiding things that get us into trouble. So we all learn pretty early on you want to avoid making mistakes. It's just logical. It's rational. But at the same time, it doesn't actually help you move forward, because if the only things you do in life are the things you're good at, you're never actually going to learn how to get better and how to create something beyond what you naturally are predisposed to doing. So my husband and I, one of the greatest examples that we have is the fact that we were both pretty good in school. Like, I didn't have to study at all for passing tests, and I barely spent more than an hour on my homework on any given night. Now, my husband took a different route. He decided that because homework was so easy and boring, he would just skip it entirely, which I think bit him in some ways as well. But the truth of the matter is, neither of us developed that work habit that you would otherwise if schooling weren't so easy. And there's a particular YouTuber called Healthy Gamer who talks about how when he got into college, he found that his study habits were not in place and that caused him to fail. Well, my lack of study survived even through college. So even college was not enough to teach me to actually put in work on things. So my education process was a lot more painful. And this is the same issue that anybody who is gifted in any fashion basically is likely to go through during their life. Because even though we all say that high intellect is a good thing, you actually wind up usually worse off than people who are of a lesser intellectual level. So I wouldn't say people who are a higher intellect are actually smarter or more capable at life. And generally, we actually fall more into the category of special needs. So it's not necessarily better for you to be smart and intelligent, especially because when you do fail, it hits your psyche. Like it becomes a personal strike. It becomes an issue with you as an individual rather than just something you did wrong. So there are a whole lot of problems that you run into with high intellect, but one of the biggest ones is the fact that you are not at all prepared for failure. And more than likely, unless you fell into like a very, very challenging environment when you grew up, you grew in a similar fashion or in some way determines that if life was hard, you shouldn't have, or it's probably not right for you. You know, that if you're struggling with something, it's not your thing. But That's not actually how it goes. And the best example for me is business. That is where my education process really came in, because I always knew that I wanted to start a business. Make sure to subscribe, and then once you do, leave a comment saying that you subscribed, and I will do my best to reply to every comment that is left. I knew the word entrepreneur at the age of 7. Like, I was probably one of the youngest students to understand what that word meant, and I always wanted to own my own business. And I started my first business while still in high school. I initially started trying to write best-selling novels. Now, that's a very challenging endeavor. If you want to write and become a best-selling novelist, something you may want to know, you probably need to get 15 to 20 books before you actually stand any chance of making a sustainable living at it. That's a lot more writing than you probably anticipated, and it certainly was for me as well. So I wrote my first book. It didn't get any traction, and I went, oh, well, then I guess I must not be a good writer. And then I went into another business. I went into network marketing. I did a couple different network marketing businesses. None of them worked out. And then as I continued to go through the years, I tried various different businesses. I tried drop shipping. I tried create to order type products, like t-shirts and mugs and art sales. I am an artist, so I can draw, and I tried selling that and no dice. And then eventually I got to the point where I'm married, we've got our first baby along, and now I'm investing into learning how to become an advertising manager. And that was a $6,000 investment that pretty much didn't go anywhere. Now, I do find that the education I got from it was immensely valuable and likely will continue to serve me, but I did not wind up creating that business model. And I discovered pretty quickly that I don't want to create that type of business model because it doesn't give me the lifestyle that I want to live. But as the conclusion of the story basically is that every time I started a business, it would get too challenging, it would get too hard, I would run out of money, and I'd be like, well, I guess it's just not for me. I guess I'm just not destined to win in this particular avenue. I guess that my business is some other model, because I never gave up on the idea of business for whatever reason. But the more times you run into this failure, or the more times that you give up on an idea and then come back to it, the more you start to realize it's probably not the systems in place that are the issue. It's probably you. And that's where we have to start to realize that making mistakes and failure are inevitable whenever you're trying to do something you don't know how to do. And that's vitally important for you to know, because anything you want is likely something you don't know how to do. That's why you're wanting it rather than having it. You have to grow and develop as a person in order to get that type of thing or development in your life. If you want to have a successful business, you have to learn how to run a business, and that is not a skill that you generally are naturally going to know how to do. Yes, you may have some talent for it. I'm pretty sure I do have a certain talent for it. The fact that I can come on a screen and record myself talking to a camera without too much issue is a natural talent, but that doesn't mean that I'm better at it than, say, the best YouTubers out there, because the practice and actually putting the time in and making the effort to become great is beneficial, and it's going to take them further than somebody who just jumps on the screen and starts recording, even if they have natural skill. So natural skill, definitely a boost. But natural skill plus talent, that's where you reach the peaks. You can't really beat somebody who is simultaneously naturally talented and putting in the work. So that's something that we have to recognize, that even if you don't have the natural proclivity, or even if you do, you still have to put in the work. And that's something that it took me a very long time to realize. I still have to put in the work. So you're going to have to put in the work too. Anything that you're trying for the first time, you are likely going to fail at. You're likely going to make mistakes in. You're probably not going to have things turn out exactly the way that you want them to. If you are trying to lose weight for the first time in your life, you're probably not going to stick to your diet. It's 99% likely that you will fail at that first diet. And so often we get to this point where it's like, well, I've tried everything. I've tried every diet and none of it works. Clearly my body just doesn't work that way. But we wind up kicking ourselves in the foot when we do this, because we're essentially saying there is no hope for me. So we have to let go of this notion of being entirely unique, that all of the rules of life don't apply to us, and recognize that we are likely the ones who have made a mistake in this equation, and move forward. Now, when it comes to the cancel culture that we currently live in, mistakes can be kind of fatal. They can destroy your life, and that is a big reason why I think people tend to hold back, and I can totally understand that. That's one of the reasons why I held back so long with building a YouTube channel. You know, there's a part of me that's still concerned about the backlash that I'm likely to get on various videos, and the chances that I am going to make a mistake or make a verbal faux pas are pretty much a guarantee. I will offend somebody at some point. It is pretty much inevitable. Even if I don't necessarily say something wrong, somebody else will take something I say wrong. So it's pretty much just written in the rule book that I will offend somebody, and that's something that I have to contend with. And that's something that we all have to contend with. You know, we have to recognize that no matter what we do, even if we do it correct, even if we do it to the best of our ability, somebody else may not agree with us. Somebody else might view it as a mistake. So the best ways to deal with failure or to deal with mistakes is, one, do your best to keep it private. You know, if you're trying to create a YouTube channel where you're sharing your heart, your soul, and your education with other people in a very public forum like this, that's not necessarily an option. You can obviously still have private life. You can, you know, not share every aspect of yourself and your life and what's going on in your family and, you know, all the dark secrets and skeletons in the closet. But at the same time, you're in a very public forum. So if you develop any sort of a following, any mistake you make is going to have a much bigger backlash. And that's just something that you have to get comfortable with if you decide to go in a public place. But if you're not going public, being private is still an option. You can absolutely be more private about your failures than other people tend to be. You don't have to necessarily share what you're doing every day with everybody else. If you decide, hey, I want to create a business, you don't necessarily have to tell your family. If you decide, hey, I want to learn to play the guitar, you don't necessarily have to share that you're playing the guitar. You don't have to share that you're trying to learn a new skill with other people, because more than likely they're going to come back at some point and be like, oh, well, how's that going? Or they're going to judge you for it, and they're going to kind of make you question whether you should or shouldn't do it. Business being one of those main examples where people are like, oh, I don't know about that. You could lose a lot of money. So keeping things private does have its benefits. Another way that you can deal with your mistakes, though, is you learn from them. You know, you grow beyond the mistake. You recognize that your mistakes happen and they teach you something. So rather than looking at a mistake and then going, oh, well, that's it. Clearly, I'm terrible at this and I might as well give up. You decide, all right, I obviously have something to learn here. What is the lesson? And the more often you can ask that question, the more you're going to learn, the faster you're going to learn, and the less likely you are to make mistakes again in the future. So analyzing what went wrong and why it went wrong is an extremely valuable thing to do as far as making mistakes and avoiding failure in the future goes. But I'd say the biggest thing you can do when you're trying to avoid failure or avoid making mistakes is to recognize that you will make mistakes. It is absolutely going to happen. And that even though you will make mistakes, it's still worthwhile, because everything you want is on the other side of that learning curve. You actually have to learn how to work through your challenges in order to get the life that you want to have. So the question that often comes up when you reach this point is, do you want to be the stupid idiot who has the life of your dreams, or do you want to be the smart person who doesn't? And I think as you think that through, you're likely going to conclude that you would rather be thought of as stupid or dumb or idiotic or, basic or simple even, and move toward the life that you want, rather than holding on to this kind of naive perspective that you are a smart, intelligent, completely faultless individual who doesn't have anything that you want. So as far as I'm concerned, that is basically the ultimate question that you can ask yourself as far as moving past your failure. But in the end, it all comes down to, do you want to get what's on the other side of failure? And my guess is if you're afraid of failure, The answer is yes, because what you're wanting is something you don't know how to do yet. So this is a learning process. You have to recognize that it's a learning process, welcome the mistakes, and work to improve yourself. And if you can do that, you'll eventually reach your goal, because ultimately you will run out of ways to fail, and you will understand the processes required to actually achieve your goals. So I hope that helps. Talk to you later.